All right, so I guess the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on a layer. Um, okay. And before I even get started with this, I want to talk a little bit about skeletons and joints to begin with. All right, so I'm going to turn on my grid, and I'll go into the rigging tool set, and under skeleton here, I can just create joints. All right, so creating joints is like creating curves, polygons, whatever. You just click and you got a joint. Okay. So there's a joint. 1, 2, 4. Okay. I don't know if you can see this from where you're sitting, but that joint has that little red line there that's pointing. That's the joint axis orientation. Right? Now watch that when I put the next joint down. I'm going to put it down here. And you see how that turned, right? It turned, it rotated so that it's pointing down the next bone. Okay? So, you know, oops. So I just made an error that's pretty salient. So what I can do here is if I use the up arrow, I can navigate back up this joint hierarchy. If I use the down arrow, I go back down. And as long as I am still in the joint tool, I can put down another joint, but it will come off of the selected one. Okay, so I can do, I can create joints that way. All right. So just going back to this joint orientation. If I select this, let's just look in the. I don't know. Do you guys use the hypergraph any at all? No. I don't even know if the node editor shows this, but I'm going to use the hypergraph because it's a really good way to see your hierarchies. Okay. So there's my joint hierarchy, and the top node of that, it's a hierarchy. So that just means that everything that is connected below that has to move or rotate with this top node. So if I rotate this, everything rotates with it. If I go down, the descendant joints are going to rotate without the parents. Okay. Here, if you look at this hierarchy, you can see that this joint 4 now has 2 equal nodes. So a lot of people will call this like this is the parent, and these are the children, and these 2 children are siblings because they're hierarchically on the same level. Okay, so joint 5 down here is this one. Okay, and joint 8 is this one. Okay, but if I take the parent, it's going to move both of them. So I'm going to pick this, and then in my selection, I can select the hierarchy right here, and that will pick every joint in there. Okay, so it's not just the parent, it's all of them. And then coming up here, do you guys ever use these selection masks? Have you ever used these? Okay, so these masks right here, you'll see like this this set of 3 little icons right there. Those relate to these little icons here. And basically what they will do is either enable you or prevent you from selecting certain types of objects in Maya. Okay? So just for example, right now, this middle node right here, or this middle button, this is objects. So those are things like surfaces and curves and joints and lights and cameras and things like that. The one to the right of it is components. So that would be things like edges and vertices and faces and things like that. So if I have my objects on, all of these are blue, which means that they're all enabled. Okay, and so this is handles and joints and curves and surfaces and things like that. So if I come in, I can pick my joints, I can pick my model, I can pick anything. All right. This little arrow here will turn things off, all objects off, and now I can't pick anything. Okay. If I turn joints to on, I can pick the joint, but I can't pick the model. Okay. So sometimes, especially when you're rigging, you'll have geometry with a joint inside it and then a circle going around the outside of it with controllers. And sometimes it's very small and you'll be in there digging around and you can't just get the right thing. So these selection masks are really, really useful for that. But where I want to use them is in a display kind of capacity. So if I just go, I'm going to go ahead and select my hierarchy again, and I'm going to go to my component mode. All right, and the components here, these are like vertices and edit points and edges and faces and things like that. And these are all off right now by default. I don't know if that's default or that's just the way it is for me. But if you come over here to this question mark, the question mark is like a miscellaneous component, right? And if you right-click on this, you can see what those miscellaneous components are. So I'm going to turn off the multi-components, and I'm going to turn on the rotation axes. Okay? And what we see is this is really nice, the way that this works. Okay? So what we'll see is the by default, change this. Default x-axis always moving down ascendant bone in a hierarchy. Always. Then the Z is going to go straight through. Okay, so that Z is like the hinge rotation. All right, it's going to rotate around that Z. So an example would be like this. And goes through that hinge. Okay, that pin is the axis of my. I open the door, rotate around that. Now, if that hinge were oriented that way, and I tried to open the door, swing up, going orient. So the local rotation axis is really important in a joint. Now, this happened to draw really perfectly, and I think that it did that because, I don't know, maybe Maya is afraid of me. Or maybe they fixed it since the last the last version. Let me see if I can break it. I'm going to just go and I'm going to draw joints in this kind of S curve. That, okay? And then I'll select the hierarchy. And then I'm going to show my local rotation axes. And it looks like the y-axis is pointing up in all cases, which is really nice. The end one doesn't matter because the joint, it always applies to what's below it. So there's nothing below this joint, so that doesn't make any difference at all. All right, I'm going to purposely break this because if you encounter it, you'll need to fix it. So what I can do with these local rotation axes is I can rotate them around, and I'm just going to rotate this one about 180 degrees, okay? And I'll just do it with that one. So this looks fine, right? I mean, it's still going to rotate around that z-axis correctly. The x-axis is still pointing down the descendant bone, right? But because it's reversed like this, the math isn't going to work. So if I rotate this joint in a positive direction, it's going to go clockwise, and this one will go counterclockwise because they're reversed. Okay, so if I pick this joint and this joint together, and I try to rotate them, see, one goes one way and one goes the other way. Right? So that can cause some problems for you. So you want to make sure that that your joints are oriented correctly. Okay? So I'll show you a quick way to fix this that's exact. Let me just, I'm going to undo. Rotate this around again. I won't. So if you want to rotate the axes of these joints, you would have to go into component mode. You make sure the question mark is selected. You pick the rotation axis here, and then down on this MEL line down here, I'm going to do it in the script window so that you can see it better. The MEL command is very simple. It's just rotate. Okay, so obviously we're rotating. And then minus R, which means relative axis. Okay, so I'm going to rotate it relative to its current position, right? So if it's at 9 degrees and I rotate it 90 degrees, it's going to go to 99 degrees, right? Absolute rotation would be 90 degrees on the world axis, okay? And then I just want to say X, Y, and Z, right? So I want to rotate this on the x-axis 180 degrees, right? So I would just go 180, 0, 0, okay? And enter, and that pops it down. Gives me the exact rotation that I want. So if you run into that, that's the way to fix it. Okay. It doesn't look like you're going to run into it so much, but you might. So okay. So the other thing that you want to consider is just moving and adjusting these joints. Okay, so so there's some joints right there, and we already know that the x-axis is pointing down the descendant bone, which is going to have it make it rotate correctly. So what if I want this joint up here? What are some ways of well, sort of, yeah. Well, yes and no. Some methods will do that and others will not. Okay, so that's kind of what my point is. So I'll just keep going. So if I want to move this joint right here, one way of doing it is to rotate the joint above it. Okay, so if I want to move my elbow as a human being, the only thing that I can do is rotate my shoulder. So that's an acceptable, fitting and proper way of manipulating a joint when you're editing, when you're putting all these joints together. Okay. Another way that you can do it is to move it. So I can just hit the move key, and I can just move it here, and then the upper joint is going to rotate to accommodate that. Okay. But look what happens when I move it, and I go into the local rotation axes. I move that lower joint. It didn't really affect this one, my x-axis. Now, when I try to rotate this, the moving is going to cause you some problems. Okay? Not too many problems, because you can always select this. You can always select this joint from the top, or you can select just the affected joint. And you can go into your skeleton, and then under Orient Joint, look at the options here. You're going to leave these at their defaults, but basically the primary axis is the X, so that's what we've got, and then the secondary axis is the Y, and this will reset the orientation back to the defaults. Okay, and so then down here it says orient the children of the selected joint. So that means that I can take this joint and then reorient everything below it. So I'll just go ahead and apply that. And it says I can't do it because the transform joint has non-zero rotation, because I rotated that before. So now there's some rotation on there. So let's see if I can fix that. Let's select everything. Select the hierarchy, and then I'll just go to modify and then freeze transformations. Okay, and see if that problem is still there. It is. Okay, so now I've got non-zero, I've got zero rotations on there, and I can apply that, and now it reorients that. So zero is a really important thing with rigging, all right? So you always want to make sure that things are set to zero, because there's going to be some math involved. Maybe not here, maybe not for you, but in advanced rigging and in advanced animation applications, those numbers really make sense. They're important. So you want to zero things out as much as possible.